Welcome to TVBS Meeting Room, where we tackle global issues with a view from Taiwan. I'm your host, Wenqi Yu. Few people in Washington, D.C. have been as committed and focused on Taiwan security issues for so long as Bonnie Glaser. He's also a familiar face to Taiwan's audience. We're pleased to have Bonnie as our guest today to talk about the new book she co-authored, US-Taiwan Relations, Will China's Challenge Lead to a Crisis? And to share her insights into current Taiwan-China and US relations. She's the director of the Indo-Pacific program of German Marshall Fund. Welcome, Bonnie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, in this book, you and the other two authors argue that it's not the US role to solve the cross-strait challenge, to mediate between Beijing and Taiwan, or to negotiate with Beijing, America's relationship with Taiwan, which a few previous American presidents have done. So what is the role of America then?
I think the role of the United States is to create an environment that is peaceful, to keep peace and security in the Taiwan Strait and create space for the two sides of the strait to work out their differences, not through use of force by Beijing, and certainly not through coercion. Essentially, it is just to create the opportunity for Taiwan to not be intimidated, bullied, taken over, God forbid, by force, but to give the opportunity for time and space for Taiwan and China to eventually work out their differences peacefully in the ways that serve the interests of the people of Taiwan.
Well, that is assuming that Taiwan and China can actually work out the differences and can engage in dialogue. But it seems that that is not on track right now, right? So would US get involved in trying to broker any conversations or dialogue?
I do not think so. The United States does not see its role as an active mediator between the two sides of the strait. It has never played that role. There are aspects of the relationship between Taipei and Beijing that the United States does not get involved in. For example, the United States has never taken a position on the 1992 consensus. It does not favor one party over another. It simply wants Taiwan to be able to have free and fair elections. And that will be true, of course, in the elections coming up in January as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, aside from the book, we all know that, when it comes to policy on Taiwan, the role of Congress is just as important as the administration, if not more. And it has a long history of that. We don't need to go into that. However, I do hope to hear from you how, when there are two different political parties in the Congress as well as in the administration, how do you really listen to Washington, D.C. or analyze when it comes to the real policy on Taiwan?
Congress has always played a very important role and a unique role in U.S. policy toward Taiwan. And of course, 1979, the creation of the Taiwan Relations Act, that remains the framework for the U.S. Approach to Taiwan, and ensuring that the Taiwan Relations Act is implemented is one of the jobs of Congress. I think that it's really only been in the last 5 years that Congress has actually enacted laws that seek to strengthen Taiwan's security and U.S. ties with Taiwan. That's relatively new, and it suggests that there are many people in Congress who believe that the Taiwan Relations Act may need to be in some way bolstered or supplemented. So we see many dozens this year. I think we're up to something like 25 or 30 bills that have already been introduced in Congress this year and that pertain to Taiwan. And there are many of them that are relevant to Taiwan's security. Of course, the support for Taiwan is really bipartisan. Not that the parties always agree on everything. You will see, for example, that a bill was introduced earlier this year to recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. I believe that there's 18, there might be more now who've signed on to the bill. They're all Republicans. Generally, Democrats would think that this is not necessary, and there are many important ways that we have to support Taiwan, but that might not be the most important. But Congress's role, of course, becomes particularly important when it comes to money. And a good example would be providing Taiwan with foreign military financing, putting Taiwan in this category where it's mostly been US allies in the past that can receive US funding for the purchase of weapons or training that comes along with that. So that is another example of Congress. But I would say that there is still concern in the executive branch that the president's constitutional authorities are not impinged upon by Congress. And so you will often find signing statements that go along with bills that are passed where it is said that the president retains the right to make final decisions about how something is implemented, even though it may be included in the language of a particular law.
I mean, this is certainly, one of the more fascinating decision-making process that I don't think most people outside of the U.S. really understand when they look at U.S. policy toward Taiwan. Any congressman's statement or, things, tends to be quoted by the media as if it is U.S. policy. So appreciate your explanation. And so in your decades of work on Taiwan and China, what have been the biggest surprises?
Well, I first was exposed to Taiwan when I went to Taipei to study Chinese, and that was a very long time ago. It was in 1979, and I arrived 3 weeks after the United States broke diplomatic relations with Taiwan. So it was really a very interesting and unique period. And of course, Taiwan was under martial law at the time. So I think what really has surprised me most is how Taiwan has transformed since then. Of course, the lifting of martial law, the freedoms that have become so much a part of Taiwan's society. The fact that Taiwan became the first country in Asia to enact a gay marriage law. These are things I would not have expected in 1979. So that is what has surprised me the most.
That's nice to hear. And obviously, the 30 years later, Taiwan has changed a lot, both politics as well as economically and society. Including having a female president, Tsai Ing-wen. And it appears that you and the other two authors in the book actually recognize President Tsai Ing-wen's strategy when it comes to, being more steady and calm management of the cross-strait relationship and Taiwan-US relationship. But her term is up next year. So how should Washington, D.C. be prepared for Taiwan post-Tsai Ing-wen?
Well, I think that the United States is very deeply engaged with all of the candidates who are running for president in Taiwan. We have a new AIT chairman in Washington, D.C., Laura Rosenberger. She has already made 2 trips to Taiwan. She recently did meet with all 3 candidates, spent some time talking with them. I think that the priority of the United States is always just to prevent any kind of interference from outside, to ensure that the choices of the people in Taiwan are really those that determine the outcome of this election. The United States does not seek to put its finger on the scale. It does not choose or try and push for a particular candidate. That's not something that really serves American interest. So I think the important thing is just that we have open communication channels with whoever becomes president in Taiwan. I believe that regardless of what party they come from, that Taiwan's president will want to have very close relations with the United States. The US and Taiwan have a very, very strong partnership, and hopefully it will continue to grow stronger under the next president.
Well, Washington, D.C., has been quite focused on building up Taiwan's defense for better deterrence. And that is also President Tsai's priority. Right now, many assume China will invade or annex Taiwan when its military is strong enough and ready. In your book, you also point out that this is actually debatable. Do you believe that a better relationship between Taipei and Beijing would actually prevent China's invasion of Taiwan? And what is, the chance that China would actually invade Taiwan triggered by something else not related to Taiwan, ruling party or anything, but more like, an incident actually happened in South China Sea and somehow it, escalated into something more serious?
Well, as for the latter part of that question, I think that most experts on China and the PLA believe that if China had a conflict that it was involved in on one front, that it would not see it as advantageous to open another front. So if the Chinese were actually engaged in a military conflict in the South China Sea, it would not seem wise at that moment for them to attack Taiwan. The Chinese likely would have enormous challenges in one conflict. They would not want to divide their resources and attention.
So it is not in their interest, basically, to do something like that.
No, I think it does not serve their interests. I think most people are concerned about the reverse. So, for example, if China were to invade Taiwan, there are concerns that North Korea might use that as an opportunity to use force against South Korea and even invade. But that could involve China in some way, shape, or form. But if China were to be engaged in a conflict elsewhere, I don't think it would want to divide its attention.
And going back to the previous question, do you believe a better relationship between Taiwan and Beijing would actually prevent China's invasion of Taiwan?
We don't know how a better relationship between Taiwan and China would affect China's decision making. One possibility is Taiwan and China, if they reopen communication channels, perhaps could return to enforcing or implementing some of the agreements that were passed during the Ma Ying-jeou administration that really focus on, let's say, law enforcement, things that would serve both the interests of both sides. And that would be welcome by the United States. But there is a possibility that if the two sides reopen communication channels and began cooperation, that we could see Beijing impose pressure on Taiwan to engage in political talks. And I think that is something that China, of course, has always wanted. I think it encouraged the Ma Ying-jeou administration to engage in political talks. And at the beginning of President Ma's administration, he expressed an interest in having some kind of political dialogue with China. But he himself backed away from that, recognizing that the domestic support in Taiwan was absent. And so there is one possible scenario, and of course there are many, that if there were better relations between the two sides of the strait, that maybe Xi Jinping becomes more impatient, or maybe he becomes less impatient because he's less worried about Taiwan declaring independence. So we really don't know.
Yeah, I think especially after Ma Ying-jeou's failed attempt to, have a better relationship with China because of domestic resistance, I think that's changing Beijing's thinking about Taiwan as well. I think in the past, most people would think, China believes time is on their side, and so they're willing to be patient. But, my question is, especially after the protests in Hong Kong, and given the increasingly hawkish stance in Washington, D.C., do you Beijing still believes in that? And even sort of, believing that there are still elements or forces in Taiwan that they can work with towards their ultimate goal with Taiwan?
I don't think that Beijing has given up on its goal of peaceful reunification with Taiwan, but a very important caveat there is that peaceful includes all the forms of coercion that China is using against Taiwan. And this is, of course, military and diplomatic, economic, increasingly use of cyber disinformation, etc. But I think it's important to not look at this issue through the lens of what we see on the outside. It is important to look at authoritative documents in China. Last November, there was a very authoritative statement by the Chinese that time is always on the side of the mainland when it comes to Taiwan. I think that was the exact quote or close to it. And I don't think that language would be used if they had concluded exactly the opposite. So I think that China is not perhaps as confident as it was years ago that it could achieve reunification in the near term. But I don't think they've given up on it. And if they can't achieve it peacefully, they have greater and greater confidence that they can achieve it through military means because of the very rapid development of PLA capabilities. They may also miscalculate and believe that the United States might not put its military assets and its soldiers and airmen at risk and come to defend Taiwan. Hopefully they wouldn't make that miscalculation, but we don't know. Mm-hmm. So I believe that although China might not, as I said, be as confident as it was a few years ago regarding the trends in Taiwan, it is more confident about its own capabilities. And so it's really hard to say whether China has completely lost hope. If that were the case, then they might have already made a decision to use force against Taiwan. So we know that according to the US intelligence community, that Xi Jinping has instructed the PLA to have the capability to invade Taiwan by 2027. At least that is what is widely believed. I have not seen the evidence, but there is certainly no evidence that Xi Jinping has made a political decision to take Taiwan, that he has concluded that reunification cannot be achieved through any means other than use of force.
Yeah, it sounds like the difference is really having the capability, but whether you are using that capability to actually move on Taiwan or not, that's a separate issue. Well, for someone who's worked on, Taiwan and China for so long, do you have any personal view in terms of what an ideal relationship can be between the two political entities?
That's a very difficult question to answer. And first, I would say that I am, as an American, it's not for me to decide. I don't think it's for any other country to decide, which is why I started out saying that the U.S. role is really to create a peaceful environment so that the two sides can work out whatever differences when they have the will to do so. That doesn't mean the U.S. is urgent to have them work them out now. That, again, is up to Taiwan. But of course, this should be done in a way where both sides have equal status and are able to protect their interests and are not subject to coercion. We don't want to see China force Taiwan to accept something that its people don't want to accept. So for me, the ideal relationship is one in which the people on both sides of the strait get to know each other better, get to understand each other, and decide that ultimately they have to work out their differences peacefully, and that China abandons its right, what it claims to be its right, to resort to the use of force. I think that the anti-secession law that was passed in 2005 was unfortunate, not the right direction that Beijing should be going. I understand why they did. I understand why they reserve the right to use force. But I think that ultimately the best outcome is for China to take force off the table, and the two sides of the strait to work out their differences peacefully, and then to have more interaction to get to know each other. I think is essential if we are ever to get to a peaceful solution. And I'm not overly optimistic, so I don't want to sound Pollyannish, because there is no certainty that a peaceful solution will be achieved, but we should never give up hope.
And you mentioned equal status, the two words, which is very important as well, right?
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for speaking to TVBS Meeting Room and for your long-term commitment to helping the world understand Taiwan better. Take care.
Thank you.